So I'd like to welcome everybody here today. I'm so pleased to see such a beautiful turnout. Um, we actually have attendees from all over the map, hailing from the UK, the US, and Canada. And I do have to comment that we have a really healthy representation of academic librarians, especially from every corner of Alberta. So thank you all for coming today. I do have a few introductory remarks and some housekeeping items just to address before we get started. I'll start by introducing myself. I am Madeline Van Werf, and I am going to be the moderator of this event for the next hour. I'm an associate professor and a liaison librarian at Mount Royal University. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm a first-generation settler, born and currently living on Treaty 7 land. Both of my parents are immigrants from Ireland and the Netherlands, respectively, and Mount Royal University is located in Mohkinstsis, which is now referred to as Calgary, Alberta, Canada, which is the traditional territory of the Niitsitapi, the Blackfoot people, and the people of Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations. Mohkinstsis is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3, and I'd just like to note that I'm very grateful to work and live in such a beautiful spot on this planet. I'm also grateful and excited to moderate today's talk, a discussion with Mike Caulfield. So welcome, Mike. We're going to be discussing his paper, Information Literacy for Mortals, Real-World Strategies for Evaluating Information in University Classrooms. And Margie was so kind to share the paper in the chat, and I'll share again just for latecomers today. So this is what we're going to be talking about. This event is part of Project Information Literacy's provocation series, and the series presents essays that offer new insights on information literacy, drawing on scholarship and current events. Each essay that is part of this series is designed to spark discussion about how educators, librarians, researchers, journalists, policymakers, students, and beyond, and how we can navigate through the increasingly complex information landscape out there. This event today is co-sponsored by Mount Royal University and Project Information Literacy. So for those who don't know about Project Information Literacy, or PIL, not to be confused with Johnny Rotten in any way, although I just can't help myself. Project Information Literacy is a nonprofit research institute. Their home base is in San Francisco Bay Area, and they work in small teams of research practitioners on large-scale studies. And since 2009, they have released 12 groundbreaking open access research reports. And to learn more about them, I've shared some information in the chat. This, as I alluded to, this session is going to be recorded, and because it's a large meeting, I see everybody's already done so, but please keep your microphones muted until we come to the end part of the segment for the Q&A period. The paper discussion itself should take up probably the first portion of the hour, and I hope to save the last 20 minutes at the end for questions. It might be easiest to type them out in the chat, and I can read them out. But if you would like to engage with Mike yourself, please raise your hand, and I'll start a queue so you can ask him questions directly. And now I'd like to get to our guest. So Mike Caulfield, welcome. Mike is currently a research scientist leading the Center for an Informed Public's Rapid Response effort around election misinformation at the University of Washington. He's worked with various organizations on digital literacy initiatives to combat mis and disinformation, including the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, American Democracy Project, the National Writing Project, CIVIX in Canada. He's the creator of the Sift method for evaluating the reputation of claims and sources. He is an awardee of the Rita Allen RTI Misinformation Solutions Prize and the author of an award-winning open textbook called Web Literacy for Student Fact Checkers. Also in sleuthing the web to find bits for this intro, I came across something exceptionally intriguing about that I found on your faculty page, Mike, at UW, that you're also an esteemed musician. And so I'm really dying to ask a little bit more about your breaking through the Latvian airplay charts, but
Yeah.
we'll get through the paper business first and maybe talk about that later. So welcome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So I guess to start, I'm, for those who may have not have read the paper, maybe we can just talk a little bit about that. If you can give us kind of the gist of it and some points about what this paper is all about.
Yeah, sure. So the title actually comes from Gerd Gigerenzer book, um, where he talks. The book is called "Rationality for Mortals," and the point that Gigerenzer makes is the strategies we're often taught to make decisions assume that we have these sorts of godlike qualities, that we have sort of infinite time, complete knowledge, and so forth. But as a matter of fact, we in general, when we're making decisions, um, there's a lot of scarcities involved. And some of the scarcities are, of course, time, right? Time to make a decision about whether you believe something, whether you want to read something, whether something is worth your attention, whether it's not. Also, background information, right? We're very often in areas where we don't have a lot of domain expertise. Um, and so the question then becomes, if we educate uh, students to make decisions in those sorts of environments with those sorts of constraints, what does information literacy look like in that sort of realm? And it's not to say that other other aspects of information literacy are not valuable. I mean, certainly when students are looking, teaching students to do deep research into a subject, uh, um, pull things together into a paper, put together an annotated bibliography. I mean, the introduction into scholarly work is part of what the Academy does. It's a big part of what the Academy does. For people that are going to go on to further study, it's one of the most important things that the Academy does. But as we've shifted over the past, I'd say, since around 2000 or so, as much of the Academy has shifted into thinking more about preparation for citizenship, assisting students in personal life, and I think also some of the aspects of professional or business life. Thinking about what sorts of information literacy suits that environment is important. And so what the essay actually does is it lays out some of the ways in which the sort of deep attention, deep domain knowledge approaches that we encourage students to value above everything else may actually make students worse when they approach places where they do not have complete knowledge, and where they do not have sufficient time for an in-depth examination, if that makes sense.
It does. So, and to kind of build on that, because sometimes I know in my instruction too, we try to teach people how to read vertically. And a lot of what you're talking about in this paper is reading laterally. And this kind of aligns with how we, generally consume information these days. We read information in bursts outside of an academic environment. So I'm wondering, if you can talk about the difference between vertical and lateral reading and how much of this is contextual. And you already kind of touched on this and related to format and the value
Yeah.
of each approach.
Yeah. So, to define a couple terms, lateral reading is a term that was introduced in a paper by Sam Weinberg and Sarah McGrew back in 2017. And it was the production of that paper was like very it was personally meaningful to me because I had actually been working and talking about some things in 2016, and Sam reached out to me by email when he had seen something I'd written, and he said, I'm reading what you're talking about here. I got to tell you about some research that we're doing because we're seeing some really interesting stuff. And so we got on the phone. It was, it was actually, it was like Christmas Eve day or something in 2016. And I shared what I'd seen over the past, I'd been kind of struggling with these issues in this sort of, I think, sort of unfocused way, I think, in retrospect, since about 2010. And Sam shared what he was seeing in this research, and the two things really just connected. And so, what was he seeing in the research? So the research in that particular paper took a bunch of Stanford undergrads. It took a bunch of Stanford undergrads, a bunch of professional historians, well-known professional historians, although they weren't named, and a bunch of fact checkers. And it looked at it with a sort of an over-the-shoulder design. It looked at how these different groups of people determined veracity or credibility when they looked at sources, when they looked at claims. And what they found was that the fact checkers who got things right and got things right really quickly tended to come to a page, and then they tended to immediately get off the page, right? And they tended to say, well, who is this person talking here, right? Who is this person talking? What do other people say about this claim this person's making, right? They didn't even read the page before they started asking those questions. And they found that the professional historians who had deep academic training would open the page and just start reading it, without knowing where it came from, who it was from, any of this sort of stuff. And then that would lead these academics to make these very very bad decisions on credibility. Academics were actually fairly easily fooled. And so the term Sam and Sarah came up was this term lateral reading. And the idea of lateral reading is that it's a practice that fact checkers and others use when they come to a page to immediately get off the page, and rather than focusing on the page in front of them, focus on sort of the network surrounding the page. What do other people say about the claim? What do other people say about the site? What do other people say about the source? It's sort of a crucial intersection with this paper, because one misconception I think people have is that, well, if you learn the techniques of scholarship, then you sort of apply the techniques of scholarship to the sorts of situations you find on the web. Well, the fact that you have these scholarly techniques is gonna help you out, but that's not what they were finding at all. They were finding the practice in scholarship, when you know a subject, can be like you open up a paper and you start reading it, and you recognize some of the names in it, right? You're like, oh, they're referencing. They're referencing Bloom or something like that. You understand, you have the background comprehension, you have the time, right? You have the time to go through it and really think through it. You have the domain expertise. But that's actually not the environment that most of our decisions are made in. Most of our decisions are made in this sort of environment of imperfect knowledge, limited time. And when we apply these high attention, high background knowledge strategies to things, or when students, even if they don't apply them, when their understanding is that they should be applying these strategies to things, one of two things happen. One, if they do apply them, sometimes these are the sort of strategies that bring people down into the rabbit hole, right? when people apply these high attention strategies meant for scholars, people that have background knowledge and expertise, to things they don't know about. That's where you get the person saying, did you know that COVID flies like a marble through a chain link fence, through an N95 mask, and there's 18 studies, and here's the meta-analysis. And what about that? You know, that's what happens when you apply scholarship and scholarly, scholarly practice outside, like an environment that is the scholarship environment. That's what it looks like. That's what we're undergoing now. Or the second thing happens, and this is actually a far more common thing, but perhaps in some ways more destructive because it's far more common. Students who believe that every question has to be answered in this sort of scholarly deep attention way, when they see things on the web, they don't check them. And they don't check them not because they don't feel that they should. If you actually talk to students, they feel like it would just take so long. Like, who could really know? Like, it would take so long to check everything. And when you dig into this, and this is something that the Project Information Literacy folks could talk to, as quite a bit. When you dig into that, and when you talk to students, it's because they have sat in these classes where they have taken a crap worksheet and sort of gone through this 20-minute checklist process, instead of learning strategies that might take them 30 seconds, that might take them 60 seconds. And they're not necessarily perfect knowledge strategies, but they are much more fit for purpose for the environment. And again, this is the sort of the broader thing. We struggle with this all the time. And this is what most of Guy Renzer's work is about. This was most of what, if you look at some of the stuff from the bounded rationality people like Herbert Simon, this is what a lot of their work is about. You know, it's not as if there's some sort of perfect academic knowledge-seeking process and everything else is a degraded form of that. A knowledge-seeking process is only as good to the extent it is fit for purpose in a particular environment. And we have such a hard time understanding this. It's not like, well, if you had the time and you have the knowledge, you could use this. Well, I mean, yeah, sure. And if gas didn't pollute the planet and was 30 cents a gallon, you could drive your stretch Hummer everywhere. The constraints, right? The constraints that you operate in are what determines what the best procedure is. And we've got to get, I think, over this idea in academe that we promote, I think, unconsciously to students that, well, the best process would be this, but we're going to show, but these other things are tricks. I think we've got to make sure that we right size.
Oh, Mike, you've muted your mic.
I aggressively motioned too much and I hit my space bar for a second. So we've got to teach these students these right size strategies. And that means both teaching them the scholarly approach for when they're in scholarship, but I think it means explicitly telling the students that if you apply this approach in the wrong context, it's just as bad to apply the scholarly approach in a non-scholarly context as it would be for someone to say, well, I'm going to write a paper, so all I'm going to do is Sift or lateral reading. I'm not actually going to do any deep research, right? These are equally damaging, and it might even be that the first is more damaging because people make more decisions in situations of limited knowledge and time.
I appreciated your Simon reference in the paper that you cannot solve the problem with scarcity of attention by requiring more attention. And I guess you answered my next question because I think that it's challenge. This is not a one size fits all process, but and also your comments and your reflection about studentness and letting that go and that relief. However, so my question was, does Sift play a role in maybe not reading scholarly sources, but perhaps evaluating and considering whether they should be read?
Yeah, I think it does. So here's the thing, and this is if you think about a spectrum, right? And this is why the rationality for mortals frame really spoke to me in terms of this. If you think about these issues of limited time, right, limited knowledge, and you think of that as a spectrum, uh, even within our disciplines ourselves, a lot of what we do actually involves us having limited knowledge, right? So, for instance, I'm pretty deep into the digital literacy literature, the media literacy literature, some of the intervention literature, and so forth. I'm currently working on election information interventions, trying to figure out ways in which we can help people to process information about elections more fully. And this is a situation I think most scholars find themselves in constantly. That is, they have some body of knowledge where they can look, they literally can scan, the books I have here, right here, most of them, some maybe not the Strevens, but I can look through those, and I don't have to flip to the back of the book to see who the sites are or what they're about, right? On the other hand, when I'm in the election area, now I'm trying to expand what I do, and I'm in the election area, I don't know any of this, and so as I go through, I'm going to use exactly those Sift techniques to try to expand the scope of my knowledge. I'm going to try to figure out, before I apply my attention to this or that person, on how elections get manipulated, how the election information environment becomes polluted. Before I apply my attention to that person, I'm going to use Sift. I'm going to say, wait a second, is this some rando, or is this a person that's relatively well respected in the field? Is this claim that they're making? Is it considered a debatable claim in the field, or is it considered common knowledge, or is it considered emerging consensus? Like, what's the status of this claim? And so, even as scholars, we use this all the time. One of the things that I struggle with when I do presentations is, we rely in our work a lot on Wikipedia. And we encourage students to go to Wikipedia to get just a basic read on an organization they don't know about, or a basic background on a subject that they're unfamiliar with. And a lot of scholars will come back and they'll say, well, you can't use Wikipedia and this and that. And then you actually ask them, and you try to be very non-confrontational, but you say, yeah, so when you go into an adjacent discipline that you're unfamiliar with, like, what do you look at first? There's an uncomfortable silence sometimes, because they look at Wikipedia too. It's just that they look at it when they're outside their domain of familiarity. And I think that's really core here. The initial lateral reading paper by Sam uses this metaphor of unfamiliar terrain. And basically, the way Sam and Sarah organize that explanation, they say the metaphor is when imagine you're parachuted into an area you don't know, you land, and you look around, and you're like, I think I know what I'm doing. And then you just head off in a direction and hope that you're headed towards civilization. Most people would say that's not smart, right? Because you don't know the terrain. It would be much better to try to maybe get up a hill or something like that to try to get some visibility and figure out, okay, where do I think I am? Where do I think I've landed? Do I see any landmarks? Do I see any, and make a plan after you've sort of made a mental map of the terrain. And so these scholarly techniques, a lot of them are a lot more applicable when you at least have a minimal mental map of the intellectual terrain, of the discourse space. But when you're in unfamiliar territory, I think leaning towards some of these quick heuristic techniques like Sift, like lateral reading, is important. So I do see the things in a dynamic relationship. And the key, of course, and this is so hard for humans, is to admit when we're in unfamiliar terrain, because it is, to some extent, it is human nature to say, oh, I know, I think I know where we are, rather than, no, it's time to pull over and just pull out the map or ask for directions. There's a sort of human nature element to this that we struggle with. And I think it can be particularly hard for people that are, have expertise in the domain, because of course it requires a certain intellectual humility.
Right. And my friend who is posting in the chat here has done some extensive research on decoding the disciplines, which is to me what you're talking about here. And also, what you just said brings me back to something you said in your paper about, I'm trying to find in my notes that the differences between the persistent belief in higher education is that all thinking is just a degraded form of research based on individual academic practices that we lionize, e.g., scholarly is the be all and end all, and Wikipedia not so much, right? And do you have any? Can you speak more and provide us with any kind of advice about how we can rethink?
Yeah. So there's I'm glad you brought that up, because I crammed so much into that paper. God bless everybody that helped me with the edit on that. But I there's a lot crammed into that paper, and there is this one additional idea that there's these sort of academic skills, and I think sometimes we've engaged in, what I had an old, when I first did my internship, my TA I started out in linguistics. I had an English comp position, teaching English comp class, and we had a teaching. We had it was an internship, and we had a class that instructed us on how to do this. And he talked about what he called the problems of the Wonder Bread model of education. And the idea of the Wonder Bread model of education is sort of, you take the students who kind of have this sort of the messy whole grain student. You pound out everything, bleach it, remove everything they come in with. And then you go and you say, oh, well, there's no nutrients. Let's go back and add some of the nutrients in. And I think there's some of that in education, that really the students don't have the academic skills. We've got to pound all these other habits out of them. We've got to take everything that's coming into the classroom. We got to strip that out. We got to bleach it out, and then we'll put good academic thinking in its place. And there's a lot of things that work to help when you actually think about, particularly decision making, in credibility. You go back 100,000 years, 200,000 years, humans are making credibility assessments. Humans are making decisions. They don't have universities. They don't have scholarly publications. How are they making those decisions? Well, people have developed over time a lot of useful techniques. And a lot of them are part of oral tradition, right? So one of the things I don't know how much, I'm trying to remember how much we had to edit out in the paper. One of the things I talk about, though, is that when you think about, I'm obsessed with theoretical approaches to rumor, because people have dealt with rumor for a long time, and a lot of the dynamics we see online are the same dynamics as rumor. And when you actually talk to people, get them out of that academic context, and you say, so how would you decide? You hear a rumor. Oh, you know what? They're going to lay off 10 people at work. How do you decide, right? How do you decide if that's true, right? And it turns out people have pretty good intuitions about that, right? Because we've been doing that, for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years, right? If you say, hey, how do you know that rumor is true? People will say, well, who'd I hear it from? They hear from Jill. Jill usually talks a lot of crap. Did I hear it from Jane? Jane, generally, when Jane says something, she's pretty sure of it, right? So you have this investigate the source, right? Who'd I hear from? Did I hear from multiple people, right? Did I just hear from one person, or actually have I heard a couple people saying this, right? And so then you have you have this idea of like, what do others say? And then, the other thing people do if they hear a rumor is they say, well, who would be the best source on this? And they go and I ask, so you hear a rumor from Jill. Jill's not a particularly reliable source. And your thought is, well, you know what? Let me go ask Pedro about that. Pedro should know, right? And that's fine, better coverage. And then ultimately, if you think about if none of those work, one of the things you can say is, well, who did you hear it from, right? Who'd you hear this rumor from, and who was the person before that? Like, who was the first person to say this? And that's in Sift, that's trace claims, quotes, and media to the original context. And so one of the things I've marveled at, it's been kind of a struggle for me to explain this issue. But one of the things that's very weird about teaching Sift is you teach a little bit of Sift, and it's been a bit unlike other teaching experiences I've had, because you teach a little bit of it, and then people suddenly get really good, like really fast, not perfect, but like the amount that a little bit of instruction does is all out of whack with what you normally get for a little bit of instruction. And just in the process of thinking about why is that over the past few years, like how can people actually be so good with so little instruction? The conclusion I've come to is that we're actually getting people to tap into some non-scholarly skills that they've developed just as part of their social development in learning how to navigate middle school. We're showing them to a certain extent how those connect to other information environments. And once they get in that frame of mind, not like, where does the footnote lead? Does this use a lot of data? But yeah, hold on a second. Where does this information come from? Who told you this? Once we get them into that mode, I think a lot, again, skills that they're using every single day that they developed, particularly over adolescence, start to get tapped into. And that is probably not, I don't think I'm a great teacher. I don't think Sift is some miracle pill. I think we kind of turn a switch where suddenly they're using these skills that they actually come into the classroom with, and that we have, unfortunately, in our wisdom, unfortunately, have sometimes pounded out like the whole grain in Wonder Bread.
There's a lot of librarians in the room, and we root a lot of our instruction in the ACRL information literacy threshold concepts, and like, to me, crossing each threshold is very an individual practice. But what you're describing to me seems more of like social. So would you say then that, information literacy is a social practice?
Oh, yeah. That's the foundation of all my work.
Yeah, yes.
and it's one of the weird things too, because in some ways, when people, because I adopted this term fact checking, because that was what people were conceptualizing it as. I actually see it as source and claim contextualization, but a student's guide to source and claim contextualization is just, it required a lot of explanation. But I sit at this interesting intersection, because you would think that the people that are looking at information in these sort of non-positivist, feminist ways, for example, looking at feminist scholarship, and you would think that they would look at, if you would look at my stuff from a distance, you might think, well, this is all very positivist, and what's true and what's false. and that that group of people would not embrace it. But as a matter of fact, I actually tend to line up with those approaches fairly well, because the fundamental understanding of feminist scholarship, for example, and information literacy, is that knowledge is a social process. In knowledge, the sort of social construction of knowledge is what ultimately gives it, validity or utility. And so if you look at, there's a great book here, actually, great, happens to be right here. If you look at Naomi Oreskes has this book, Why Trust Science, it's a great read, and it's not as thick as you think. She about half the book is responses to her point, so you get through about that much, and you're through the Oreskes part. Then the responses are great too. But one of the things that Oreskes points out is that in our moment of crisis around knowledge, the question that people are asking about, how do we know what's true, and so forth, and sort of these imperfect, in this sort of imperfect world, like coming to the point where we really embrace the fact that most people determine whether something is new by the qualities of the social network that supports the knowledge, and the inclusiveness, right? That was one of the big points of feminist scholarship, is that the representativeness of the network producing knowledge has to be seen as an indicator of the quality of that knowledge, right? That if you don't have a representative structure involved in knowledge production, that you're gonna get something that is off in crucial respects. But yeah, that's kind of what we're getting to, and that's a deeper level than Sift, right? But underlying Sift is the idea that we actually come to our beliefs, for the most part, through evaluating the social processes that produce those beliefs. And this is where I come back to rumor as the great example. To some extent, we evaluate rumors depending, on on the plausibility of them, right? We say, well, if we say that Bob embezzled money, does that seem like something Bob would do, right? And so that's to some extent, that's the plausibility of that is a piece. But for the most part, we evaluate them based on what we believe is the quality of the social process that brought them to us. If it came through channels that we trust, we tend to trust it. If we're hearing it in a lot of different places, and people are being quite specific in the way that they talk about it, we tend to trust it. And if it came through a social process, a bunch of people that seem to have it out for Bob, we don't, right? And I think understanding that that's not a flaw, that's in fact how most knowledge enterprises work. It's just that if you think about scholarship has a specific processes that are more fine-tuned for a particular type of knowledge, but it's still a social process. It's not, we don't come to our conclusion on everything by directly assessing evidence. If we had to do that, scholarship would grind to a halt. It's the social process that holds it up.
I do have more questions, but I don't want to hog you and monopolize all the questions. So at this point, I'm going to open it up. And if people have questions that they would like me to put forward, please feel free to raise your hand. There's a little hand icon at the bottom panel, or feel free to type in the chat. But while we're waiting, so again, the nature of some of librarian instruction is the one shot.
Yeah.
We have such a small window of opportunity to do that, to talk about this. Do you have any advice for how to implement? This is a big responsibility, and also a tangential question is like, who bears the responsibility of teaching students these skills? Is it librarians? Is it instructors? I
think it's everybody, right? I think that these are skills that should be interwoven, across all disciplines, and that we should, I mean, I'm not saying anything that any librarian here is going to disagree with. The reality of it is sort of the one-shot instruction that you maybe get one session, you maybe get two sessions, and maybe in some sort of introductory, freshman, so it's first-year class. And then that's part of where all these tensions come from, right? Like, are you going to teach students, sort of how to use the databases? Are you going to teach students, the basics of finding reliable journals? Are you going to teach the students Sift? What are you going to teach the students? Yeah, and I mean, I guess I don't. I guess I don't have an answer for that. I think where we've used Sift a lot in the one-shot instruction is a lot of universities do have these first-year classes that are not the traditional English comp, and you'll have the students in, and those first-year classes sort of bridge scholarship, but they also get into citizenship, they get into other elements, right? And so Sift has turned out to be a particularly good fit for that, because it has elements of scholarship, but it also works very well with some of these civic concerns. In your traditional English comp class, I think, I mean, this will feel like me punting, but you got to, I mean, it's got to be in the class. It can't be an adjunct. I mean, it's kind of the most crucial. It's kind of the most crucial thing in the class, and it can't be the one shot. And I think maybe there's hope that we get past that. For a long time, math track that was not the 200 and above kind of was treated in the university as this developmental math track, right? And it's like you teach all that, so we don't have to. We'll take them when they're post algebra, and then more recently, what's happened in math instruction is the idea that sort of this intersection of civics and statistics for the student that's not on the engineering track or the physics track. This these classes that show basics of statistics and apply them to civic issues and things like that are probably a better path for them. Even sort of elementary professional assessment of statistics and things like that. There's a movement around that, and I'm hoping that there's some movement around similar movement around information literacy, where we start to say kind of in the same way for the students that aren't going on to. I don't mean to segregate and track and tier everything, but vast majority of students at most institutions don't go on to graduate school, right? They do go on to professional life and civic life and so forth. Can we put in place some courses that really make use of that? And I think we could put some of this stuff at the core of those courses. But yeah, it's hard. It's not just the one shot. It's also this tension between that we have at the university. This tension between preparation for further scholarship and preparation for civic and professional life.
Yeah, I'm seeing this more and more at the development. Actually, Norquest is here. I don't know if you want to comment on this, but I have that's the most recent example of trying to address these critical literacy skills beyond a footnote within a 90-minute one-shot session. And we're seeing more and more of these civic literacy, online literacy courses, full courses, or pretty robust modules being developed in order to support this. Because it's almost, you almost kind of feel negligent. You have a task at hand in the one shot. They need to know how to use the databases, but you also want to talk and discuss more deeply about basic literacy concepts.
Mhm. Yeah, and and the other thing I'll just say is I do hope wherever we go with this that librarians are involved. I think I think they've sort of been struggling unrecognized in this whole in this whole thing. But given the constraints, I'm always inspired by what they accomplish. We just need more time with this. And it really it's so core. It's so core to all the decisions our students will make in and out of the classroom, and the idea that we don't really. The idea that it's all these sort of sidecar things is we've got to get out of that.
Does anybody have any questions for Mike? We have 10 minutes, and I'm cognizant of time here, and I just want to leave room for questions from the group, larger group. We have Liz. So Liz is a librarian at Norquest in Edmonton, Alberta, and she's asking, she has a comment. There are obvious limitations to the one-shot and to focusing on sources in isolation, especially since our information environments are so networked. The model that PIL has proposed, that we focus more on how information finds us versus how we find information, gets at the social construction of knowledge and information processes you discuss. She's wondering what this can look like in practice in a class session. And she's also said she loves this discussion. Thanks, Liz.
Yeah, so I think it's important for people to understand how information finds us, and I think it's also tough to teach that in a way that doesn't breed absolute cynicism, right? So one of the things that we have to watch out for is that, people need to be aware of algorithms. At the same time, if you go down, sort of anti-vaccine rabbit holes, there's this belief that the algorithms are, sort of the Orwellian Buddha fascism, that's keeping the people down. And there's got to be something in the middle there. I think I always want to tie anything that we do to agency, right? And so at the end of, I absolutely agree that thinking about how information finds us is important. And then the question is, how do students intervene in their own information environments to make sure that they have to sort through less bullcrap, and that can't be sort of abstinence only web education, right? It's got to be, it's got to engage with the fact that they'll be on the web. But I think we need to show the students ways in which to construct their information environments so that better information is finding them, in more diverse information is finding them, and they're seeing more diverse voices. I think that's all a part of it. Ultimately, if you can deal with that sort of in this upstream way, then downstream you're sorting through less dubious information, and that's ultimately how students will, in future citizens and current citizens. I guess we're all citizens. That's how people will. That's how people will ultimately get through this information overload issue.
I have another comment in the chat from Sarah Banting, who is a professor here at MRU in the Department of English. And she says, no question, just appreciation, including for the comments about first-year writing comp courses. A challenge to make this happen, but I'm persuaded. And for those of us still using rhetoric terms as we teach writing, the idea of ethos connects nicely with your points about rumor and credibility.
Yeah, no, and I think the first year courses, man. I think people are doing brilliant things in first year courses right now, and I think we've got to get that work respected by the institutions. Too many times the first year courses are not, rotating in. Too many times the first year courses are rotating in a group of professors who are not otherwise engaged with the university. People are, I don't know how to say this. I love first year professors, but they very often are not, universities are not putting their full-time tenured professors into these courses. And that's not a problem in the case in terms of instruction, because I do believe the people in those classes are teaching them just as well. But it's a problem in terms of, it's a sign that the academy is not seeing this as a crucial process, and not seeing this as a crucial course. And so I think we've got to get these. I think we've got to get these courses more respect, and I hope the innovations that people are doing in these first year courses in all of these areas, I hope they catalyze changes in the curriculum at large, because I think ultimately that's where we need to go. The underlying Sift and underlying the Oresky's work and underlying lateral reading and underlying, if you read Michael Streven's The Knowledge Machine, underlying all of this is really a theory of knowledge that is social, that recognizes that the assessments we make are about understanding the social and institutional architecture of knowledge, both how it tends to produce on average better results than individual people, and both how both currently and in the past it has sometimes malfunctioned because of biases that come into it, right? And if we really are, if universities are about knowledge, that underlies everything, right? And as we move into this, I think, period where it's just going to become more and more important to understand how knowledge is socially constructed and how that's okay, if we think about that, explicitly, if we surface that, how it shouldn't be scary to us that we can't individually verify everything like a lab report in middle school, that it's okay, that we say, well, I believe this. Actually, my neighbor actually is very up on this, and they said this proposition on the ballot is good, so I'm voting for it. That's okay. That's how we actually survive. This is an underlying theory of knowledge, and this is how knowledge works, especially in an increasingly professionalized, complex society. And if our institutions see that as just a footnote to what they're doing, like I just don't see how we can deliver on our promise. So Sift is a method. I hope people look at it. I hope people adopt it. Lateral reading is a method. Underneath all of this, though, is I do want people to understand that and engage within the university the idea that we make these decisions based on these sorts of social architectures, and that if students leave our institutions thinking that the way they're going to figure out whether to take the vaccine is to go through a bunch of Excel sheets and compute a standard deviation, that we have really fundamentally failed our students and perhaps done more harm than good.
Well, we are almost out of time. And I'll give anybody an opportunity to throw one last question in here, but I'm seeing nothing. Thanks, Mike. This is awesome.
Thank you.
I do wish we had more time. I'd also like to thank the MRU Library Curriculum Committee, especially Alice Swaby, our department chair at MRU, for doing some of the heavy lifting and putting this event together. Also, of course, Allison Head, Kirsten Hostetler, and Margie, who is always and will forever be the best wing person on the planet, for organizing this on PIL's end and doing such an amazing job for putting everything together. Thanks for those, everybody for coming. I'll share the recording with first with our communications coordinator to organize how it will be shared more widely. And I will keep track of all of the juicy links that Margie shared in the chat. So right now I'll stop the recording. But thanks everybody for joining us today.